In VS Code, you can have multiple emulators running at the same time. This allows you to test your layouts on different screen sizes or on Android and iOS without having to stop and restart your emulators. Here, as we change colors, you can see both apps updating while still maintaining their state. When developing in VS Code, I'll typically have an iPhone and an Android phone open at the same time, and I'll use iTerm 2 connected to Fish as my shell prompt so that I can quickly open things with minimal effort. Fish is an awesome user-friendly shell prompt that has a lot of code completion baked directly into it and keeps a history of all the commands that you've typed in previously. Simply typing pjo and the first part of my project, I'm able to open VS Code into my project, and typing pj will let me quickly skip over to a project no matter which folder I'm starting from. Setting this up is actually pretty easy and only takes a few lines of code. Here, I'll show this on a fresh install of macOS. Open a web browser and go to the following GitHub repo. Select the first line of code under automatic installation, which will say bash curl. Then press Command space and type in terminal. Since Mac defaults to ZSH instead of bash, you'll want to type in bash, press enter, and then paste in this command. This will download a number of tools and help you get set up with Fish and iTerm. It will begin by installing command line tools, though if you already have Xcode on your machine, then you don't have to bother with that step. Next, the script will install Homebrew, which is an excellent package manager that I highly recommend. Homebrew makes updating programs very easy on your Mac. If a program can be downloaded from the web, chances are you can either type brew install or brew install cask to download it. And brew upgrade will upgrade all programs you have installed in this manner. The script will then install iTerm 2, which is a high-quality terminal emulator for Mac. iTerm has a lot of advantages over the default terminal, but my favorite is the hotkey that allows this to go into the foreground so you can type your code and then get back to whatever you were doing beforehand. For my setup, Option space or pressing Ctrl twice will open a terminal window. The next step is for a default color scheme in iTerm, which I'm just going to say yes, but realistically I don't use. It will import and open iTerm, and you just need to close that out. Next up are Powerline fonts. Make sure to click Install Font at the bottom so that this nerd font will install. These will allow you to see information such as GitHub status directly within your terminal. Next is to install Fish, which is a command line shell that focuses heavily on usability and auto-suggestions. Compared to bash or ZSH, it absolutely speeds you up, given that it keeps a history of everything you've typed in previously. And whenever you see a suggestion that you want to click through, just press forward on the arrow key and it'll fill everything in. Pressing tab in Fish will also give you a number of suggestions if you don't see them already. Next up is Fisher, which is the package manager for Fish, in a similar way to how Homebrew allows you to install packages on a Mac. There's some really useful plugins and themes, including the pj command I showed earlier. Finally, I've added a second script that you can type in to download the iTerm profile that I use. Use the second command to download the iTerm hotkey profiles.json into your downloads folder. Then open iTerm, go to Preferences, Profiles, Other Actions, and import the JSON profile. Once imported, you'll want to set hotkeys default as your default. And for good measure, you want to make sure the nerd font is your default font. These two profiles allow for a transparent terminal, and every time you press Option space, hotkeys default will appear. This screen persists across all desktops. If you press Ctrl twice, another terminal window on the top will appear, and clicking anywhere below will make that screen disappear. The next major step is to get your emulators up and running. If you don't have Xcode installed from the App Store, then go ahead and do that now. Just be warned that it takes a long time to download and install. The first time you open Xcode, you'll want to go up to File, then Open Developer Tool, and then Simulator, which will load your iOS emulator. After you've loaded this once, Pressing the command palette and just typing in simulator will go to this same screen. You can use Homebrew to install Android Studio and Flutter, and you can even use it for VS Code and Chrome. Here I'm showing them as separate steps, but you could really put them together in a single command. Check the description for a blog post that includes all commands as well as a step-by-step on how I would suggest getting up and running. And if you have any of those tools installed ahead of time, you don't need to add that to this Homebrew command. To get an Android emulator up and running, you'll need to open Android Studio, which I do by pressing Command Space, and then just typing in the first few letters of the application I want to run. I'm going to click past the defaults for the first load of Android Studio, set dark mode of course, and then let it download the relevant SDKs. As with VS Code, this will take a little bit of time. To get the emulator to run properly, you do need to allow software from Intel Corporation, and I'm just going to skip the restart for now. Once all that's done, you'll want to click on Configure and then SDK Manager. Then go to SDK Tools and download the Android SDK command line tools. These are not installed by default, but are necessary for Flutter to run properly. Accept the licenses and then let everything install. Finally, you'll want to go to the AVD Manager, create a virtual device if you haven't made one yet, and make sure you run it at least once. The next big step is to install Visual Studio Code, as well as Chrome if you don't have that set up already. Since this is a fresh install, I needed both of them set up. I also needed to accept the Xcode licenses, which you wouldn't have to deal with if you've already opened Xcode ahead of time. As with before, I would suggest using the command brew install cask, Android Studio, Flutter, Visual Studio Code, and Google Chrome. Just delete the program names that you already have installed on your machine so you don't install it twice. When you run VS Code for the first time, the only two extensions you need to add are Flutter and Dart. That said, here are a list of the extensions that I consider to be extremely useful, but feel free to use whatever packages work best for you. There is no right answer here. If you follow me this far, you should be able to go into your project's workspace, run Flutter create, and I would suggest creating an organization name so you don't have to change that stuff manually later. Here I'm going to call this Fish and Flutter. And when all that's done, I'm going to type PJO, type F, press Tab and Enter, and that will open VS Code. If you haven't noticed, I'm a huge fan of the command palette. In VS Code, the default is Command-Shift-P, so that I can start typing in Launch Emulator and just go ahead and open up an iOS simulator. I'll repeat this process for my Pixel 3a. When both emulators have loaded, I'm going to go down to the Run and Debug tab, click Create a Launch.json file, and then copy in all of the information from this website's code block. I can replace all of the text from this launch.json file with the text from that code block. This will allow me to do multi-device debugging, but I will have to select my own unique device IDs. To do that, I simply press Option Space, start typing in Flutter devices, and it will tell me the IDs of my Android emulator, which I'll copy into the Android device ID, as well as the iOS emulator, which I will copy into the iPhone device ID. From here, I move up to the play button, press all devices, and then click run. When this is done compiling, it will allow me to have hot reload available on both an Android and an iPhone at the same time while I'm developing my app. And like that, we are up and running. Now, every time you make changes to your code in VS Code and press save, you'll see that update in real time on your Android and your iPhone. Hopefully these steps were useful. I would suggest checking the associated blog post for the direct code snippets, or just go to the relevant GitHub pages where those snippets are also available. Happy coding, everyone. Stay safe out there.